What I didn't want to do to this fine gentleman, Josh Lovan, what I didn't want to do to him is just be like, hey, good morning, you're in. Hey, Josh, good morning, you're in.
Welcome.
Hey, nice to be here, fellas. I appreciate the invite.
You got it, brother. Okay, so Josh, before we get to anything in regards to talking points, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about how long you've worked in the industry, what it's been like to work in the industry, and the journey that has brought you not to Road Gang Radio, but actually ended up getting you in J.J. Keller.
Yeah, you bet, man. I began my career in law enforcement in 2000, and I worked for a large police department in Arkansas, and that I ended up becoming a detective. Worked in an undercover capacity, investigated homicides, but mainly worked with narcotics and working in an undercover capacity. My last almost 3 years that I was working there, and I ended up working a case for a large less than truckload company, one of the nation's largest carriers, and through a just set of unique circumstances, I solved the case, and about 6 weeks later, I ended up working there. And for the next 15 years, I started out in security and ended up working my way into a director of safety and security position for this carrier. And under my purview, I had about 2,000 accidents, roadway accidents a year, 1,000 OSHA recordable injuries per year, probably 400 to 500 chemical spills involving hazmat, and then anywhere from 25 to 40 formal OSHA investigations per year, and did everything in between. And through that, my main forte was doing depositions and courtroom work, just because I had so much law enforcement experience. So with 2,000 accidents a year, you can imagine how many lawsuits were derived from that. And when my youngest child graduated about 4 years ago, I had kind of made the decision to transition out of that side of the industry, and I was familiar with J.J. Keller because I used them when we had been popped by a few OSHA citations. I'd used them for training purposes, and so was familiar with them, and transitioned to that side, and I've been here for 4 years, and now I do a bunch of live events, teach DOT training at live events to our clients, and then work with our consultant teams, and do a lot of webcasts and stuff like that. But I've been with Keller for about 4 years, and kind of bringing you a little bit of a unique perspective, because it's not just the transportation industry. It's kind of mixed with the law enforcement regulatory side of things. So it's been a fun transition, and I really enjoy being here and getting to discuss kind of some issues that I've run across, and because everybody can kind of know what the regulations state, but the tricky part trying to figure out how to make them work in your operation and in your organization,
And by the way, I actually, full disclosure, if you think I didn't have Josh's bio in front of me, you don't know much about Tom Bray, me, J.J. Keller, or even Josh here. I wanted you to do that for us because I wanted to kind of establish your bona fides. And as Dre, when the moment you said law enforcement, Dre looked at me and started nodding. You and I have trod a little bit of the same terra firma, not in the same direction. Did a lot of family services myself. Did some investigative work for the DA's office in Jefferson Parish and in Orleans Parish as well. So I know the road of which you speak, by the way. And one of the things on your talking points that I kind of wanted to start with, rather than kind of go through this methodically, and you just said something really great about making the regulations work for you. Too many people look at the regulations, Josh, as this kind of labyrinth that they've got to kind of make their way through, with the FMCSA as a minotaur at the center of it. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like, how can I get through this, as opposed to understanding what the benefits are to some of the rules and regulations. And I know people say benefits to rules and regulations, but a lot of them, if you adhere to them, can make for a much safer trip. And in your talking points, I wanted to talk both from a perspective of you as a law enforcement agent, but also you in your current role, about accident procedures in regards to that. And I wonder if we could jump around a little bit here as we kind of onboard you into this segment. Can you talk a little bit about preemptively being ready for an accident, whether you're at fault or not, and what the procedure should be in the immediate aftermath? I think more people get in trouble from not telling the truth, not having done diligence before the accident starts, and saying the wrong things or behaving in ways that get them in terrible trouble, when simply telling the truth would have been made all the difference. But talk a little bit about what you would advise people when an accident does occur on the road, what the protocol for behavior after the accident is transpired. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. That's a great question as well. One of the biggest issues that we always run into was not having the full story. Like I said, we had about 2,000 accidents a year, and a lot of those accidents don't happen from 8 to 5. So when you have a traffic accident that happens during normal business hours, it's a lot easier to not miss anything. But when you have an accident that happens at 2 in the morning and the driver is not giving you the full story, because drivers have this, sometimes can have a self-preservation mode that kicks in, especially if they know that they may have not done something right, or it could be their fault. And when you've got an adverse party involved, you don't necessarily know that how the extent of the injuries, if there are any at the time. And some of the worst things that can happen is that you perceive that an accident is not near as bad as it is. And then, you work an accident maybe Friday night at 11 p.m. or Saturday morning at 2 a.m. And when you get to the office on Monday, you find out that somebody's been in the hospital for the last 2 days, say the accident was much more significant than what you were aware of at the time. And because of that, you may have not done your due diligence and really investigated it thoroughly. Because let's face it, you back into a dumpster, you're not going to call vice presidents and wake them up at 2 in the morning, versus, an accident with an injury, that's significant. But a lot of times, because your drivers are the ones that are communicating most of the information to you that first hour on the scene. And during that times when you try to figure out, do I need to get an insurance adjuster out there? Do I need to get a safety manager on the way? If I've got one in the area, or do I need to wake up a terminal manager or service center manager and have them respond to the scene? And you really have to base what the driver is telling you on what level of response that you want to have as a company. In my experience, not asking the right questions, not asking enough questions, is really important in that space, because if something happens, especially when there's injuries or you don't have the whole story, one of the worst things that can happen is you've not done your due diligence in taking photographs. You've not secured some vehicle telematics data like you should have, because you didn't think it was significant. And basically all that boils down to in court, oftentimes, which is not going to be for 12 to 18 months later or in a deposition, what you find out is that accident was much more significant than what you originally were told about. And it looks like you didn't do a really good investigation, a thorough investigation. And during deposition, you can say whatever you want, or in court, you can say how your company has a culture of safety and how you comply with the regulations. And you can talk about all this stuff, this great stuff, and all the awards your company's won. But for this specific accident in court, it looks like you completely failed, because you're just not prepared. You haven't done you just didn't do a complete accident, because at the time of the initial notification, you just didn't think it rose to that level to where you needed to kind of do a more thorough investigation. So that's one of my big things, is treat all accidents like they're going to end up in court. That's the best advice I can give anybody. Even minor accidents, get in the habit, the cadence of doing a thorough investigation every single time. If it involves an adverse party, typically we're taking that driver out of service. So that gives us time to really thoroughly investigate and make sure that the driver wasn't over their hours. If you're running dash camera footage, of course, you're going to look at that almost as soon as you can to kind of give you an idea. And that's another thing. Dash cameras have made investigating these accidents so much easier from a executive management standpoint. And in my experience, I would rather have a 20-second clip of an accident than 10 witness statements. Witness statements are
Oh,
just
yeah.
inherently unreliable and all that stuff. But if you give me a 20-second video clip, I can pretty much determine how much if I need to go all in, or if this is going to be something that we should settle immediately, or get our internal attorneys involved with. So, but yeah, there's obviously a lot of nuances with accidents, but not doing a thorough investigation just because you don't think that it is. Many times later on, they become bigger accidents because you don't know about an injury at the time or some kind of non-compliance issue for that your driver had.
There's so many things I can unpack here, so I'm going to give you not rapid fire, but a couple of quick questions. And let's see how much I remember as well, too. One of the things you have to keep in mind when an accident happens, not during regularly scheduled business hours, which is when a lot of accidents happen, is that you're also dealing with law enforcement, particularly at 2 o'clock in the morning. Have a little patience with them, because if your accident doesn't involve alcohol, doesn't involve, what I would call catastrophic disaster, a lot of the time, these men and women who are out there are often dealing with much more strange incidents at 2 o'clock in the morning than simply your fender bender or even a side swipe. And have a little bit of patience. Remember that these are people who are taking their lives into their hands every time they step out of their car, every time they step out of their squad car, and have to make their way over to you. They don't know what they're walking into. They don't know who they're going to be dealing with, and they have to be constantly always vigilant. So it really is imperative and important that you stay calm, breathe, and take your time when speaking to the law enforcement officers on the scene to think, not to not speak, not to drift into the self-preservation you talked about, but to make sure that your mouth doesn't race ahead of your thought process, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And what I've found is in depositions, you learn this. A lot of times, a really bad accident, it ends up being an emotional scene for the driver. It's very natural for a human being to, when somebody's really bad injured, for a driver, for both sides, just to apologize and say, I'm sorry. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but you need to coach your drivers on not being overly verbal on the scene. If it's an accident with injury and you know that it's going to end up kind of being one of those bad accidents, you need to get with your driver really quick and get that driver linked up with an insurance adjuster or your company safety department, the director, whatever, just to kind of walk that driver through the kind of interrogation process. Now, drivers are going to give statements to law enforcement, but at that point, my previous role was you can talk to law enforcement, give them the facts when they ask questions as you know it, never lie to law enforcement, obviously. But we wanted to get our driver to give law enforcement some safety professional, one of our safety managers' numbers, so we could kind of get the ECM data off the tractor and just any of the company credential stuff that would be needed for a law enforcement report. You really want to limit your talking time that your driver does with anyone, because the driver's really rattled at that time. A driver, it doesn't matter if a driver's been there for 30 years, they're worried about their family, their career, what am I going to do, especially if it's their fault. And what I found during the interview process with law enforcement, a lot of nervous drivers get really chatty. And basically that equates to opportunity for plaintiff attorneys, because your driver's just volunteering information that necessarily shouldn't be volunteered at that point.
Don't say anything you don't have to say. Answer truthfully to the point, but don't say anything you don't have to say. Don't volunteer information. The other thing I always tell people, too, did you play any sports in high school? It's okay if you didn't. Did you play any sports in high school?
I sure did. I was active in almost everything, and then after high school, I played softball pretty competitively for about 20 years. Yeah, kind of a sports nut. Loved football, but I'm a baseball guy by heart, but played them kind of all, But yeah. I was a baseball guy growing up.
Yeah, let me tell you something, and this works for both tackling and sliding. I can't tell you the number of times I would get tackled, and I'd wake up the next morning, and of course I expected to have a bruise on the side I was tackled. I was always surprised at what I would call the bruises on the other side, and it was only after a coach said, well, of course, you're getting hit at high speed at one side and then basically having the high speed hit come to a stop by the ground. And you made a point earlier on about the conversation that even if you don't think you're hurt, or even if you don't think the other person involved in the accident is hurt, don't be surprised if 2 days later, 1 day later, they wake up the next morning and realize an area where they weren't struck or where the impact didn't happen actually having more damage when they slammed into something on the other side because of the force of the momentum. This is why the moment of the accident doesn't always tell you all the information and facts that you need to know, which is why you should keep your stuff close to the vest, because you don't know the full extent of not only the damage to the vehicles, but you don't know the full extent of the damage to the people on the scene, correct?
Yeah, that's about as well said as I've ever heard it. If you've ever been in a rear end kind of accident or a violent kind of accident, a lot of times that whiplash effect doesn't take full effect for about 3 days. So a lot of times trucking companies get really frustrated because they feel like, hey, they're just trying to have a lawsuit against our company. They're trying to run us, into the ground, something like that. And the reality of it is, a lot of times people don't, they're not injured. They don't feel injured immediately after the accident. But like you just stated, 2 or 3 days later, they really start to feel that. And I understand that when you've got an 80,000 pound loaded CMV and trailer, 80,000 pound, that it's involved in any kind of collision with an adverse vehicle. Oftentimes there's going to be an injury that comes from that. And oftentimes those injuries, everybody can understand, like, hey, if you go straight to the emergency room in an ambulance, like, hey, that's somebody's hurt. But a lot of times these people will go home and they don't go to they won't go to the hospital till the next day. And a lot of examples of cases that I've worked where there's been significant neck injuries, back injuries because of whiplash that weren't noticeable at all. And at the scene, those same people may be walking around. They just kind of are in shock. They don't feel it. They don't feel that pain immediately. So that's why I say you have to treat every accident like it's going to end up in litigation, because most people that are involved in an accident with a CMV, there's going to be some type of injury, at least minor, and a lot of those aren't treated immediately following the accident. They're within 2 to 3 days of it. So, and those accidents they're real. Those injuries are real, and anybody that you've known that's had some type of neck fusion surgery or back fusion surgery caused by an accident, a lot of times those people will tell you that, hey, that it was a low speed accident and they honestly didn't know that they were injured at the time. And for a trucking company, if you're at fault in those accidents, that's part of the insurance game. You have to be knowledgeable and aware of that, and not fight. To me, when I would look at those accidents when we were reviewing them for depositions or court, you don't want to go in and try to bully somebody that's actually been hurt in an accident that you caused. So I was always a big advocate with settle as quick as you can, and do the right thing. Be transparent and honest when it gets down to depositions, and not try to fight it like they're just trying to beat you, through insurance. And obviously there's a whole other side of fictitious claims. But for the most part, accidents do cause injuries when you're driving trucks that weigh 80,000 pounds, that are loaded.
Yeah, and you said that also earlier, by the way, and if you guys are just joining us, Josh Lovan is joining us. We are thrilled to have him on board after almost 10 years of doing On the Highway with Tom Bray. We now have a new fellow from J.J. Keller joining us this morning, off to a great start. You made a really good point, too, because you're a guy who creates a lot of safety culture, and you can create the greatest safety culture in the world. You get on the stand and you detail how fantastic your safety culture is, and a lawyer will jujitsu you into saying, funny, that all sounds great. Let's go through exactly what happened on this accident. And by your own words, you didn't do what you normally said you do. We got you.
Right.
And that is the real killer there. That is why it's so important to kind of not only create that safety of culture, but make sure that every single person who engages in it knows the parameters of what's supposed to happen. Because The safer your culture is, when you do something really wrong, it becomes a great contrast in a court of law and can really, really sink you. Let me just ask you this before we run out of time here, and to give you a chance to talk about it as well. In regards to, we're going to set up what we're going to talk about next time. Can you talk to us a little bit about how one goes about creating the architecture of a culture of safety in response to the FMCSA's rules and regulations? Can they, in fact, be the guidebook in some ways that you can actually create one that both has common sense and deals with some of the intricacies of what the FMCSA book is doing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wonderful question. And yeah, you have to, everybody, and here's the frustrating part of this. Everybody, that's the buzzword in the industry, and it's been the buzzword for the last 5 or 6 years. Everybody is trying to create that, air quotes, culture of safety. And you know what a lot of companies do in this? So it's kind of funny. I mean, it's embarrassing to me a little bit, but almost all these companies, when they want to create a culture of safety, they come up with 5 or 6 new core new mission statement and some core values, character, integrity, collaboration, and they put those in their general headquarters. They put those on the wall so you see it when they're coming in. They may have some branded merchandise, but it's almost always at the general office. The people that really need to identify that you're building a culture of safety, you're doing this for your people that are actually out in the trucks and on the warehouses. These are the people that are getting in accidents and getting hurt. Your people that are your billing clerks and your safety specialists and people like that, not near big of an issue in a corporate office, but it seems like when carriers decide to go all in with the, hey, we're gonna go all in with this culture of safety mantra, it's almost always fixated on the general office, your people that are wearing the business clothes. And that's really where a lot of companies stop. But if your drivers and your forklift operators aren't involved in that process, they literally mock you and laugh at you, because it's like you're just patting yourself on the back, like in the general office. You're not doing really anything for us. If and that's the truth. I've seen it so many times. It's like, I remember our core values, character, integrity, collaboration, go down the list. But when I would talk to drivers, they were like, what does that mean for me? And they're just words on a wall. Well, for me, it was like, we're going to invest in things that we would have driver meetings. We had 240 locations. So we had meetings set up, and it took us almost a year, 12 months. And there were 6 months of research before that, but we looked at all of our injuries. And, I mentioned earlier, we had 1,000 OSHA recordable injuries. What it didn't say is we had about 1,500 that were non-OSHA recordable. So that's about 2,500 injuries across the system every single year, plus 2,000 accidents. A culture of safety really, to me, means I want to bring home everybody at the end of the day safe. And I want to see these numbers reduced, 2,000 accidents, 1,000 OSHA recordable injuries. And so we dove really deep into, let's look at the injuries. What was causing those injuries? And a lot of it was equipment. And if you go to your docks and you ask some of your tenured employees that have been driving a forklift, say, for 20 years, and you've got lifting, pulling injuries, shoulder top injuries, they'll tell you, hey, those dock plates are faulty, and we ask for them to be replaced all the time.
Josh, I'm going to put the brakes on you because I knew this would happen. Everybody's always surprised. You probably aren't shocked, though. Look at the time. We've actually run the course of this segment, and you have set us up so perfectly for the next time you arrive to begin to really lay out, based on both the FMCSA rules, but also good common sense and insight, to lay out a culture of safety. And by the way, speaking of sports, it would almost be like having a professional team and having signs all over the executive offices saying, make sure you stretch before you take the field today, and not having it anywhere in the hub itself. Josh, thank you. Welcome aboard. We are so thrilled to have you. Everything that Tom promised. Really appreciate you being here, my friend.
I appreciate you. Look forward to it.